and taking some time out to listen to what we have to say this morning. I'm going to turn it over to the mayor and let him make a couple comments first, then I'm going to come in and kind of give an explanation of what you're looking at and kind of walk you through it. So with that, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. Thank you, Sheriff. Well, good morning. There was a lot of conversation over the course of the campaign about the importance of the mayor, the sheriff, the office of the mayor, and the office of the sheriff working together. We both committed to that in the campaign and have done just that. Public safety, I've stated, is a top priority, making sure that Mike and his team, and then frankly others that are involved in public safety, have the resources available to them to make sure that Jacksonville is in fact doing everything that it can for every neighborhood on the public safety front. You may recall that when I was in transition mode last year, the election was May 19th. I was sworn in July 1. In that in-between period, one of the first things I did was travel to Tallahassee to secure the COPS grant. Working with Mike, we worked at that together. That was the initial, before I was even sworn in, before Mike was even sworn in, to begin efforts to secure funding for necessary and needed resources. To that end, we have, over the course of this last year, we have formally scheduled meetings, speak regularly via phone, and meet informally when we need to talk about a whole host and series of issues. One of the things that we recognized we needed early on, Mike shared with me additional police officers and bringing back the community service officers, which we did in the first budget. And we did it without a tax increase. And then as we got into the year, recognizing that because the resources available to Mike had been so depleted in previous years, that we needed overtime, that presence, a real presence in neighborhoods would make a difference. And we were able to do that, to work together and provide $1.5 million in overtime, which Mike will talk about how that's worked. We've continued to invest in other things that the sheriff and I know is a long-term solution, and that's prevention and intervention. So we're just here today to say that we are working together, that what JSO is doing is working, and the people of Jacksonville need to know that. And with that, I'd like to introduce the sheriff and also someone that's become a friend over the course of the last year plus. Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me give you a little bit of explanation about what you're going to see today and the graph that we've got up here. So as you guys, many of you guys know, we've been very data-driven at JSO for many years, and we use data to deploy resources, and we track series, patterns, and trends. We meet every Wednesday morning in a ComStat style meeting, and we hold the zone commanders accountable through some accountability-driven leadership concepts that we use here at JSO. In doing that, that's been a great tool for us and continues to be a great tool. We're going to continue to do that. But in this past year, we've really taken a different look and drilled down a little deeper into those numbers. And we have really focused on non-domestic shootings in our community. We feel like that is, and believe that is a significant driver to a lot of the violence that we see here in Jacksonville. Well, to that end, in December of last year, January of this year, we had a big spike in non-domestic shootings. With that, we immediately went to the mayor and to the council. We came up with the overtime plan, as the mayor mentioned. We were able to put those officers on the street because, again, the mayor and council acted quickly, and I want to thank them for that. We were able to put those officers on the street at the end of January. And again, putting the right policeman in the right place at the right time does reduce crime. More policemen does equal less crime, and this stat shows that. So what we've done since January is, again, is utilize overtime dollars. We have put 24,000 man-hours on the street in some really challenged neighborhoods in our community, and through that, you get what you've got here today. So we have really, from our high in January, created an on-average reduction, cumulative reduction of about 40% in non-domestic shootings. That's a significant number. So again, a number that we haven't looked at a lot of the past previous years. We've talked about violent crime as a whole. We talked about property crime, and then we combine them and talk about crime in general as a whole. We'll talk about that briefly here in just a second. But our new focus is to really drill down and look at these non-domestic shootings, and you're going to hear more about that, in the months to come. So again, we've utilized 24,000 man-hours. We've spent just over $1 million of that 1.5 million so far. So with that, listen, I want to thank you for being here today, and we will answer a couple questions at this point.
Sheriff, I think that everybody today is really focused on what's happening in Baton Rouge and
Sure.
Minneapolis. What are you saying to your officers about those incidents, and how do you forecast whether something like that could ever happen here?
Listen, we've got to continue to build relationships in the community, I think, and we're doing that every day. We're working on that every day. At the end of the day, our officers have to go out and still provide service, police service to this community, and they're going to continue to do that. We have to be professional in our interactions. We've got to do things the right way, and we drive that every single day. But to have an incident like that, I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, building relationships with the community so you can stop that, that type of thing from happening. So.
Well, what are you telling your officers today about those incidents and what to do specifically?
Well, we talk to them every day, and it's about being professional. It's about building relationships down at the neighborhood level. So all of those things that we talk, we're not talking anything specific about Baton Rouge and Minneapolis today. We talk about those things constantly with the officers down at the level.
Sheriff, Shanice here is Channel 4. What is your consideration for body cameras moving forward?
So the consideration for body cameras was made really months ago. We are in the process of looking at vendors and doing a lot of the groundwork that's necessary to launch what will be one of the larger body camera programs in the country when we do that. So this is a new technology for law enforcement in general. It is incredibly important for us to get this right. So there are a lot of pieces and parts to this that we've got to make sure that we do correctly before we roll the program out. The last thing you want is what you see in other communities. You see, lawsuits filed by police unions in other communities. You see programs having to be pulled back because, again, this groundwork was not done in other law enforcement agencies around the country. We're going to make sure we do it right here. So we're going to take our time. We're going to cross our T's, dot our I's, and make sure, again, we do all the necessary work that needs to be done. So for us, we'll have an implementation plan that will roll out probably after the first of the year. That will include the research that we've done up to this point. We'll talk about the pilot program sometime in the spring of next year when that rolls out, the internal infrastructure we have to build to support that. And then I've got to be able to deliver to the mayor, to the council, what that's going to cost us, not only as a startup, but what that real number is going to be to sustain that program year after year. And those costs can be substantial. So again, we're going to put all that together and present all that. And we've got months and months of work to do. But again, we want to make sure we do it right. This is incredibly important for us. It's incredibly important for this community. It's going to be a big piece of technology for us moving forward. And we can't rush into it. We've got to make sure, again, we do things right.
Sheriff, back to this initiative, you said $1.5 million approved for overtime. You've used about $1 million.
Correct.
Eventually, that money's going to run out. Do you go back to city council and the mayor? How do you plan to address that to keep these effects on the street?
So as we've mentioned always, this is a short-term fix. So we've got a couple of other things that we're working on. We launched into a partnership with the National Network for Safe Communities, John Jay College in New York. We're deep into that process now. We hope that starts providing returns for us, within this year coming up. So we have done some of the site visits. We've done some, work with John Jay. They have been here. If you remember, we talked about them coming here and looking at our data. So they've done that now. That's happened. And we're waiting on some of those other, those other pieces of the new approach to begin. And once that happens, we should start to see some return on that investment pretty soon. This has always been a short-term fix. Overtime is always going to be a short-term fix. Not only financially can you not sustain it, but it's tough on the officers to continue to do this. So for the near future, the next several months, we're going to continue to work on this overtime. We obviously are clearly watching our people and watching the dollars to make sure that we can stretch it as much as we can. But this is a short-term fix to that solution. We need to work for some long-term solutions to the reduction of violence in this community. That's what we're working on.
On that question, I've instructed my team as we go through the budget process now. We're still in the stages of where we're wrapping that up, making final decisions, but to make sure that we have built in place, should there be a need, that we can react appropriately and accordingly.
Sheriff, there's been a violent start to July already, including a teenager who was killed. Some people may be skeptical that this is actually working. What's your response to them?
Well, I think the numbers are what they are. I think you can't take a snapshot of 1 day or 3 days. I think you've got to, again, we're talking about 5 months of data right now. So it's a relatively short window, but it's more than a weekend. So we're going to have those ebbs and flows in the course of a month, in the course of a year. You're going to have that. I think it's important, again, to step back though and take a look at those, those numbers to see
So
if
far
they're
this
really
year,
having an impact. Let me say this too. we're talking about numbers here. Keep in mind that every one of these is a person. That we're talking about families that are impacted by homicides and by shootings. I mean, these are serious events for these people. We have to talk in terms of numbers to kind of take a step back and look at the patterns and series of trends. But I think we got to be careful that it doesn't get lost in the conversation that we're talking about people and families that are impacted by this.
What does the
What's your
line look
plan
like
to
when you
hire more
include
officers?
domestics? What does the line look like? If you include murders that are involved in domestics, what does that trajectory look like?
Well, obviously domestics would change the number. I mean, you've had domestics in that. But as you dig down into the crime numbers, the issue for us are shootings on the street. Does that make sense? I mean, so non-domestic shootings are the ones that we feel like we can have an impact on through enforcement strategy, through partnering with the communities, through doing other things. That's why the focus on non-domestic shootings.
Sheriff,
Sheriff
you talk about
Williams,
the
with Action News Jax. Speaking of numbers and murders, I did some digging and found out, I guess, as of March of this year, there's been 27 murders. 17 of those are black male victims. What's your thoughts on the increase of black male victims becoming part of the murder statistics here in Jacksonville?
So I don't know that that's an increase. I think if you look back statistically, which is part of what we're doing with John Jay. So if you look back statistically, I don't think you're seeing an increase. I think what you're seeing is something that has happened for many years in our community. So you have an at-risk population that in some form or fashion we as a community need to address. Part of that will be enforcement, part of it will be prevention, part of it will be intervention, but again, it's a community-wide effort. So to your point, I think if you look deeper and you look back for many other years, you're gonna see a similar number. So in knowing that, that's the population that we have to engage through a variety of approaches, and that's what we'll do in this long-term strategy.
Dana?
So far this year,
Dana.
you've had two police shootings, Mr. Bing and Mr. Crowder, also shot.
Right.
A police officer beat up a woman in handcuffs, and there was then yesterday or this weekend, there was the Denard Robinson situation. I mean, what does that say about the department and the officers as a whole, I mean, and their attitude toward this community?
Well, I think we have 1,643 police officers, so I think you can always take a snapshot of time and pull 4 or 5 instances out where officers may not have acted appropriately or may have done something, against policy. And it's more important the way we address that. So I think we've addressed those issues as they've come up in the most appropriate way.
What
And I
else
think
can
that's-
you do to, in that vein, in terms of, say you speak to the officers every day?
Right.
What can you tell them?
Well, Dan, I can tell you we're never gonna be perfect. So again, with 1,600, police officers on the street and another 800 corrections officers, you're gonna have people make mistakes. Again, I think it's more important the way you address those. And that we're transparent about the issues that happen and that we are, again, transparent in how we address them. I think that's the biggest part of it.
Sheriff,
Williams,
I
I
know
don't
yesterday
think-
you put out the statement on the Denard Robinson situation, but people wanna hear directly from the sheriff. There seems to be a perception of preferential treatment in that case. What are your concerns with that case?
Well, I just had questions, right away, and hearing the details of the case, and I haven't spoken to the officers, and really have only seen, briefly looked at the report. But it warranted somebody taking a look at it based on, I had questions, and those questions need to get answered, so we should work through that pretty quickly.
Do you know how he
Mr.
got home that
Gorganski.
night? Do you know how he got home?
I do not, which is one of the questions that I had. I mean, how does he get home, and how do you wind up in a retention pond, and there's really no explanation or enforcement activity that happened, and there probably should have been, so we're gonna take a look at that and make sure.
Sheriff,
Yeah.
when you look at the overtime deployment, a couple of questions. One, what's the maximum amount of hours that a police officer is doing per person under deployment? Another one, is there a correlation between excess hours and the sort of violence that people have been talking about, police shootings and so forth?
Yeah, I haven't seen a correlation with that, but that's something that we monitor in terms of the hours that they work. So we will not let a police officer work in excess amount of time to, that could impact his performance, obviously. Keep in mind that we can spread that out over a large number of officers. So the way we deploy the overtime, at any given time, we have 500 police officers that are off because of our blue gold schedule. So they work a 12-hour shift. So at any given time, half the guys you see in uniform are not, on an off day. So rather than have, from an overtime strategy, a couple of guys work a few extra hours at the end of the shift, that's not what we did. We reached into those 500 people that were off and brought squads of people back in with supervision, with oversight, and again, using our data, put them in the right place at the right time, and that's produced the results that you see here today. And those are significant reductions. Sustainment of that is a challenge. But I think the picture that we paint here today is that, again, if you have enough policemen and you put them at the right place, at the right time, that you can have a significant impact in reducing crime. And again, we are looking at that non-domestic shooting number as something that we believe is really driving a lot of the violence in this community.
Last question, please.
I have a question for Mayor Curry. Due to the racial tension that's been happening across the country and the racial tension here in Jacksonville, are you afraid of an outbreak that's happening in Baton Rouge and Ferguson and Minneapolis can happen here in Jacksonville? Are you concerned of that by any means?
Look, since I've been in office, I have spent time in every neighborhood. Will continue to spend time in neighborhoods, talking to people, building relationships with people, understanding their needs and concerns, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. So whatever's happening nationally, I'm concerned about Jacksonville. This is my city that I'm focused on, that I care about. I love the people of this city, and I'm just going to continue to be in and among the people to make sure I understand what's going on in their lives. And that will make a difference.
What are you hearing from the people? Because a lot of the communities don't trust JSO, so what are you hearing from the community when involving racial tensions here in Jacksonville?
Well, let me say this. So when I knock on a door, particularly in an area that may be labeled a risk area or a high crime area, those people tell me they want to see a more police presence. So contrary to some of the narratives that I see, when I'm one-on-one with people, regardless of race, regardless of neighborhood, they want to know that there's a presence there and that we care about their neighborhood and their families. Let me just say this, because there was a lot of good questions here today, a lot of questions that had to be answered. Please report this story. I mean, people of Jacksonville need to know that resources have been allocated and that the men and women in uniform are doing their job, and that is in fact making a difference. Do we have hard work to do, as the sheriff said? Absolutely. But the people of Jacksonville need to know this story.
Can I ask you once more about the domestic violence trend and the trajectory there? It seems that if you were going to pull that number out all along, that it would skew the numbers. I'm not sure that saying that there's a decline in the crime rate when you're segmenting a very specific type of crime out of the overall statistics, that is valid.
So we're not talking about the crime rate. We're talking just about non-domestic shootings. That's what this number is. So what I'm telling you today is that non-domestic shootings, if you look at all of those crimes put together, is probably the biggest chunk of what we're dealing with in terms of the violence in our community. So we have boiled it down, not that we're not addressing those other issues, we are, but when you boil it down to what is the root where we can have the most impact, and it's non-domestic shootings. Is where we can have the biggest impact in turning the tide of the overall crime numbers. Does that make sense?
Why is that? Is people who are committing domestic crimes are not responsive to police presence, or I don't understand the justification.
No. So our addressing of domestic violence would be different than non-domestic shootings. So domestic violence typically occurs in the home, and while we have Invest and other programs that we can reach into those homes and try to help, it's usually an after-the-fact type thing. So presence in a neighborhood really doesn't have an impact on domestic violence, historically speaking. Presence in a neighborhood does have an impact on non-domestic shootings. Strategic enforcement of certain groups and individuals does have an impact on non-domestic shootings. So it's obviously violent. It's a violent crime, but it's not. You can't address it the same way, if that makes sense.
And as the sheriff said, I mean, these are numbers, but from here to here, these are lives. These are lives impacted.
Can we get a list, if possible, of the areas that are being targeted, or do you know the areas? Can you tell us the areas where we're seeing more police presence?
Sure, we can get that information too.
And also, real quick, if I may, what is your plan? Maybe Mayor, you can talk about this as well, to not only invest in overtime, but also look at recruiting more full-time officers.
And we just had a job fair, I guess, a month ago, and we had about 1,000 people come through the building on a Saturday that were interested in multiple positions, not just police officer, but corrections officer, civilian employees that we have. Again, that support staff that we need. So we have to continue to recruit, and we're doing that. We've got a huge number of officers leaving the force, retiring, so we've got an attrition battle that we're working on now. As I've said many times, we're going to hire 200 new policemen in Jacksonville in the next 20 months. So recruiting is a big focus for us, and we're doing a lot, reaching out in every part of this community and outside the community, pull people in and to, bring them So it's something that we clearly are focused on, and there's a hiring plan really beyond 20 months as well. So we've got to work new officers into that equation, as the mayor can, as we work the budget and we're able to do that, those will be added to that, to that number. But right now, it's 200 new officers in the next 20 months.
And as we go through this budget cycle, public safety remains a top priority, so I am doing everything that I can with my team to make sure that we can fund additional police officers and hopefully community service officers in this next budget cycle.
Sheriff, what is
No
the?
firm decisions, but that's what we're working towards.
What is the cap on overtime that an individual officer can work?
So I don't have the number here with me, but we've got a secondary employment cap through policy that we allow guys to work in terms of the overtime. Some because of their assignment work a little bit more than that, because it's a specialized type assignment, but again, it's something that's monitored by.
A ballpark, I mean, if it's 40 hours a week is standard, how many more overtime hours might they be able to work?
Again, I'd have, just to be sure, I'd have to look and make sure that you get the right number, but we'll get that to you.
But it's
Sheriff Williams,
voluntary.
right now, does your office represent the minority population, women population here in Jacksonville? Does your office right now represent that?
We do, we could always be better. So our overall demographic for the agency is about 30% African American and trickles down from there. But we have issues in the sworn force with not only African American representation, but women. So that's a big focus of our recruiting, is to make sure we get those numbers where they need to be. So last
Sheriff,
question.
do you think Denard Robinson got parental treatment because he was a Jaguar?
I don't know. It could be, we may have a policy in place that we need to fix. So it could, anybody could have gotten that same, that same treatment. I don't know the answer to that yet, but we need to take a look at that. It just doesn't, make sense, and I have questions. So
Can you back
thank you
charge?
guys for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks.